All right, my name is Lynn Grefe, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the National Eating Disorders Association. I've been in this position nearly 7 years, and I've seen a lot of changes through these years. When people ask us what they should do if a loved one has an eating disorder, I think my first answer would always be call NEDA. We have a national helpline that's very helpful, or you can go to our website and inquire there, info@myneda.org. On our website, we have a lot of information. We have toolkits for parents, we have toolkits for educators, and we're soon coming out with toolkits for sports officials like coaches and ballet teachers, and because we really want to have tools for how to handle eating disorders when you come across them. One of our biggest concerns is if a child goes to school and they come in black and blue, well, guess what? The authorities would call protective services, and they would certainly get help for that child. Meanwhile, right now, kids are walking into these schools and they're shrinking. They're losing weight before our very eyes, or they're doing what seem like inappropriate behaviors, running to the bathroom after every meal. And it seems like we really need to do more in the schools to identify these illnesses early. It's painful. Nobody should die from an eating disorder. That's the first thing I want to say. Meanwhile, eating disorders have the highest death rate, specifically anorexia, of any mental illness. And so how are we letting this happen, and yet we're not doing safeguards to protect the children? Nobody should die from the illness if we catch it really early, and that's the goal of NEDA. And not to be fooled, bulimia, actually in my travels, I've met more families who have lost their children to bulimia. And bulimia is when people binge and purge, and as I said, through various kinds of means, whether it's over exercise, laxative abuse, or purging. So these are serious mental illnesses. They're biologically based. People don't wake up one day and say, oh, I want to have an eating disorder. People are vulnerable to these through their own chemistry. Some people would never have an eating disorder, and other people have all, it's like the perfect storm. It's a little bit of obsessive compulsive disorder or anxiety or depression, and you put that with a trigger, and something triggers to that kind of a person, and they go on a diet, and the diet explodes. Rather than just losing 5 pounds and stopping, the diet and the obsession with the weight and the size becomes everything, and it takes over a person's life. And that's the part that people don't understand. And it does become a mental illness. And I have to be sure to include binge eating disorder. Binge eating disorder now will be considered in the new, what they call the DSM-5, one of the diagnoses. And that is when a person binges, and it's usually secretive binging, and it's at night, and they might eat a hamburger and a pizza and a milkshake and French fries all at one sitting, but they don't purge. And so those people clearly would fall into some of our obesity categories. And another myth that people have is that everybody with an eating disorder is skeletal. Well, actually, that's not true. If you have bulimia, you could be any size, and certainly binge eating disorder. Anorexia, clearly, gradually, as the disease becomes more chronic, then certainly it's visible. However, we live in a society, and this is painful to say, but sometimes up to the point that that person's on a feeding tube, everybody's saying, wow, don't you look great? You lost a few pounds, because we have such a focus on being thin. You know, they say you can never be too thin or too rich. Well, you can, in fact, be too thin and die. And so it's not, you know, these aren't jokes. They're not games. They're not things that people should experiment with. And they really are life-threatening illnesses. But the good news is they're treatable illnesses. And that's what I'm here to talk about, the hope side of this, I hope, today. And we want parents and educators and doctors, pediatricians, to be able to recognize these illnesses and to intervene, to really say something. We hear one of the biggest problems is a mother or a father suspects something's going on, that perhaps the child has anorexia or bulimia, but something's wrong. They take the child to the pediatrician, and it's awful to say, but these are some of the real quotes that we've gotten from parents, that they go into the pediatrician and the doctor says, oh, you know, all the girls these days are on a diet. Or, oh, I think she looks great. Don't worry about it. It's just a fad. Oh, well, she could probably have stood to lose a few pounds anyway. I mean, treating it very, very frivolously. Meanwhile, the mother or the father are watching different behaviors with the child. Suddenly, food has changed. The behaviors with food has changed. And so we urge doctors to learn how to recognize early on and to listen to symptoms of an eating disorder, so then an appropriate referral can be made. And that's what's important. As I said, people should not have to die from an eating disorder, but they do. And the hospitalizations for eating disorders have increased dramatically, 18% in a 5-year period. Now, if you're hospitalized for an eating disorder, you are really ill. I mean, you are really, really sick, because that's where they're actually trying to restore your electrolyte imbalances, all your organs, keeping everything going. I mean, people die from heart failure, they die from potassium deficiencies, electrolyte imbalances. And if you don't die from an eating disorder, the physical complications are enormous. If you've had an eating disorder for a long time, you'll end up with early osteoporosis. You could lose your teeth, your hair. It can affect your reproductive health system if it's a woman, and you may never be able to have children. It can affect your kidneys. If you think of it this way, if you're starving or malnourishing your organs, you're malnourishing your brain, and so you're not thinking clearly, so that's what goes on. You're not feeding your brain appropriately, but you're not feeding the rest of your body and your organs, and they shut down because they need to have the fuel. It's body fuel, and it's not a joke. And if you're bulimic and the food is not staying in long enough to be digested, it's almost as bad as if you're anorexic in terms of the damage it can do. Further, it can affect your esophagus if you're bulimic. So there are a whole lot of health issues that you can suffer as the result of an eating disorder.